let's do a deep dive into the Enneagram Triads. The Enneagram can be confusing. It can seem like you're supposed to memorize all these endless lists of keywords and descriptions. And then a lot of folks will say, well, I relate to this and that and this. In fact, I see a little of me in lots of different types, if not all of them. But if we understand the root of each of the types, then we avoid that kind of confusion. When I've worked with clients from C-suite level, multinational companies, all the way through to psychologists and master coaches, training them in the Enneagram, on the ground, literally when you're in the heart of helping someone figure out their types, because tests are not often accurate, and therefore I believe the best way to discover the types is to actually empower, to educate, to inform, so that you partner with people to work out their type based on insight and information. So on that ground level, working with clients, when someone says, but Cole, I don't know if I'm a 7 or a 3, I relate to some of 2 and 6 and 9, this kind of insight is going to help you to separate out one type from another and to understand the Enneagram in such a deep way. As I always tell my students and my clients, you want the Enneagram in your bones. You want the understanding to be there instead of a mind checklist of, okay, that's a keyword, that's a keyword, that's a keyword. So let's dive in and help you to understand the triads as a foundation that you can return to again and again. So you've probably already bumped into some of the classical Enneagram language, which describes 8, 9, and 1 as the gut types, and 2, 3, and 4 as the heart types, and 5, 6, and 7 as the mind types. You might have also come across that people refer to these same 3 groups as anger for 8, 9, and 1, shame for 2, 3, and 4, and fear for 5, 6, and 7. You might have also heard them described as doing, thinking, and feeling. And if you are new to this journey, or even if you've been down this road for a little while, that can seem really confusing, because we can all feel anger, we can all feel fear, we can all feel shame. I hope that we all feel, think, and do. So yes, these are centers of gravity. And what I started experimenting with in the early years of working with the Enneagram, especially when I was in business environments where I had to work with big teams of 15, 20 people, then if you've only got 3 hours, you really have to know your stuff, and you have to help people to get the Enneagram really quickly and help them to sift through what type they really are. What I started seeing is that this was really confusing, and it didn't help people to really get how this works. So I started experimenting with a metaphor, and the metaphor that stuck, and I've been using ever since, probably for more than 15 years now, and that really works on the ground with the professional Enneagram coaches that I train as well, is the concept of a pearl. So a pearl forms around a grain of sand, which means that there's a core irritant, there's a little something on the inside that the oyster coats. It's a little grain of sand, and the oyster coats this with layer upon layer of mother of pearl until you can't actually see the grain of sand anymore. Now, the personality forms in a very similar way. There's an original, if we can say the word wound lightly, irritant, something that causes a disturbance in the personality, and layer upon layer forms around it until right now, each Enneagram type and each personality, you can't actually see it in an obvious way. You've got to dig a little bit to understand it. And this grain of sand is the reason the pearl is the way it is. It's the reason a 9, an 8, a 1, a 7 expresses in the way they do. So that's why it's so important to not get stuck on what do I do, but rather why do I do what I do. Yes? The why do I do what I do belongs to the pearl. So I started calling them red pearls, green pearls, and blue pearls. And this helped a lot. So it also takes out some of the loaded language. That's also why I don't actually use labels for each types. I don't call it a peacemaker or an achiever, because also what I found is that when people heard those labels, they immediately started wanting to be certain types, not wanting to be other types. And if you work with the Enneagram and you want to help people discover the types, I mean, there's a benefit to the labels, but I still prefer the neutral number plus the neutral color, red, green, blue, type 1, 9, 8, etc. The next key point to really understand this is, and this also came after years of working in the classical way with the Enneagram and then discovering, actually, if you take these 4 keywords, and it took me quite a few years to find the words that were the most reliable consistently when working with clients. If you take these keywords, they help us to understand this grain of sand, but, and it's a really important but, you've got to see them working together. So it's not gut on its own. It's not resistance on its own. It's not impact on its own. It's gut plus resistance plus impact plus anger. So these days, I even talk about it like a sauce. Okay, so if you're tasting a sauce, you taste the salt, you taste the ginger, you taste the chili, etc. And you can separate them in your mind. You can say, well, I think in the sauce are the following ingredients. But actually, it ends up combining to create a specific kind of sauce. And then we'll name that sauce, for example, peri peri sauce. I'm just making up something here with sauce names. And we know a peri peri sauce is different to, let's say, a green curry sauce. Hope you're not hungry. The thing is, when we go, okay, but I feel anger, or I experience some form of anxiety, or I experience some kind of shame, we've separated one ingredient out of the sauce. To really understand the red pearls, which are 8, 9, and 1, we've got to put these 4 concepts together and realize that they rise and fall together. So when a red pearl experiences anger, their kind of anger, as opposed to a blue pearl's anger or a green pearl's anger, is connected to resistance, where in the gut, in the felt sense of the body. And it's also connected to something to do with how they're impacting and how they're feeling impact physically as a kind of shockwave, subtle or not, in the body. It's different to the way a blue pearl might experience anger. A blue pearl can experience anger with almost the taste of fear running through. If you strip back the anger of a blue pearl, you'll still see the mind running, thoughts like really pushing, thoughts dividing and separating out information, like chopping up information in order to make sense, to find patterns, right? And you will find that the mind that is dividing and categorizing information, looking for patterns, looking for information, is because the driver is some form of anxiety, some nervousness. And also don't see these words on their own. See them as a continuum. Sorry, back to sauce, but it's like a very hot peri peri sauce or a mild peri peri sauce. Okay, so fear can be jittery, restlessness, caution, anxiety, but it can also be turned up. The volume can become terror. So these belong together. And when a blue pearl is experiencing anger, if you strip it back, you will find fear, the mind, chopping up, separating, seeking information as the driver behind even the anger. And if you compare that to our heart group, you see that it's not just feelings, because I mean, anger is a feeling, fear is a feeling. This is the heart wanting to be seen in a way that doesn't trigger embarrassment or shame, and therefore masking, exaggerating certain qualities, putting them forward. So I always say the heart wants what the heart wants. And the heart of the green pearl wants to be seen in a way to not feel that grain of sand of shame or embarrassment. The mind of a blue pearl compared to the mind of a green or a red pearl is seeking information, patterns, categorizing, putting things in little boxes in their mind in order to appease fear, to minimize fear, to feel I'm okay. Our red pearl's gut, which is not intuition, okay, it's not. I know we sometimes talk about gut feeling. What we mean here is almost like a physical reflex in the body. Yes, a kind of instinct, but it is felt. It is not rationalized or yearned for in the heart. It is felt in the body. And anger, irritation, grumpiness, grr, is triggered. And it's triggered in the gut and felt in the gut. It's felt in the body, right, as a physical sense. So I hope that gives you an understanding of these three pearls and how they describe the reason. The reason that a 1 on the Enneagram is striving for good versus bad, and that's another layer of understanding the 1 on the Enneagram. Their good and bad dynamic is rooted in red pearl, which means that it's not good versus bad in terms of an intellectual concept, a mind type understanding. It's not good and bad in terms of image and the way other people see us. For a 1 on the Enneagram, for example, it's a red pearl good and bad. It's my body feels disturbed by a skew painting on the wall kind of good bad. Does that make sense? Let me know in the comments if you have any thoughts about this or any aha moments or any questions. So think of that pearl as that real root. And then what you do is you imagine that each type in that triad, in that personality pearl, is dealing with that grain of sand in a different way. They're also expressing it differently. So the mind of a 5 compared to the mind of a 6 compared to the mind of a 7, the way thoughts are processed is a different expression, but it's still rooted there. The way a 5 chops up information and uses separation in order to not feel anxious is different to the way a 6 and a 7 do the same. And what we do, or what I've come to realize works really well, is you take the 3 pearls and then you layer on top of that what I call the 9 polarity pairs, which are these fundamental descriptions that tell us something about how each type processes that pearl. And when you combine the polarity statement, which is, and I say polarity because there's a push-pull in the personality. The personality of a 7 is pushing towards freedom and away from being trapped. That's a primary driver. And that freedom and trapped is rooted in the fear, information, mind separating and chopping up, center of gravity, personality pearl. The 6 is trying to feel safe through gathering information, trying to figure out the whole us versus them separation and trying to appease anxiety. And the mind is busy running, questioning, and processing. Our 5 is striving to feel competent, and other types also are driven to competency. But why is a 5 driven to competency? For anxiety purposes. In other words, trying to ease anxiety. Competency is gathered by the 5 as a search for information and data. And 5s even use separateness as a way to observe, to gather information, to feel safe and to appease their fear. So do you see how you've got to put them all together? If we do the same for our red pearls, we take this gut instinct, this feeling of grr resistance to impact and how I'm being impacted. And now we combine it with the primary polarity statements. And now we have an understanding that, for example, the strong, weak descriptional polarity of 8 isn't strength in the heart or strength in a mental position or opinion. It roots itself in the gut. This is a gut felt sense of strength and weakness, and it's a resistance towards weakness and feeling impacted by weakness and getting irritated, angry by weakness, and therefore finding strength through gut instinct and even anger. So you've got to combine these to really understand the Enneagram and get it in your bones. The peace and the disruption of 9. 9s are trying to keep the peace and not cause ripples and waves. But it's not like through the mind or the heart. It's not out of embarrassment or shame or out of the mind processing, chopping up information. It's not a blue pearl. This is a felt sense in the body. There's a gut resistance to disruption, impact, not wanting to impact and not wanting to be impacted. And because the 9 is trying to stay peaceful, they are even in conflict with their own anger, because anger disturbs the peace, yes? Which then helps you to really understand what a 9 is made up of. That the 9 is a red pearl wanting to keep the peace. So where does the anger go? Well, the 9 falls asleep to their anger. They tune out, they disappear. A 1 on the Enneagram also has a tough relationship with their own pearl, because our 1 has this gut felt body resistance to the impact of bad. And bad is wrong, it's not perfect, it's, as I always say, it's the skew painting on the wall. There's a physically felt feeling attached to it. So often 1s are struggling with their own anger, because anger is often seen as bad. Now, what am I doing with my own anger then? Well, I'm pressure cooking it as a 1. I'm controlling it. I'm managing it because I don't want to be bad. Does that make sense? If we look at exactly the same with the green pearls, we take our understanding of that grain of sand, which is the heart wants what the heart wants, and it doesn't want to feel the soreness and the sadness of an image that triggers shame. Therefore, there can be some kind of masking, which of course is part of understanding how each personality type heals, grows to its highest expression. But now we combine that with these primary polarities. So we understand that our 2 on the Enneagram, this idea of selflessness, which a lot of really decent people relate to, and they all think they're 2s. But Cole, I like being selfless. I like helping. I like giving. And I'm like, yeah, but why? Why do you give? Why do you want to act selflessly? Now, for our 2s, this whole dynamic is rooted in image. It's rooted in worth. It's rooted in the heart's desire. So if a 2 is accused or seen as selfish, the polarity they're pushing against, that is absolutely going to trigger shame. And that tells us green pearl. And there can even be pride attached to selflessness. And selflessness can also be a part of the image, which means it's intentional. It's put forward as, here, see this part of me. I'm going to choose kind words. I'm going to do this kind thing, but it's because there's this green pearl heart desire driving that behavior. Now you compare that to our 3 on the Enneagram, and I've specifically chosen winner versus loser because these are identities. This is what the personality claims as an identity. And you'll see that with all of the polarity statements, our 3 wants to be seen as a winner, not a loser. And you can say with Cole, 8's like winning, 7's like winning. A healthy 9 also, can be competitive, like winning, not like losing. But the winning-losing dynamic in the 3, again, sits in the heart, and it's going to trigger shame. So losing is not just, damn, I lost, Losing can feel like the very sense of self of a 3 is being attacked, is being corroded, is being made less. So that shame is tough. Our green pills don't want to look there because it hurts. So our 3s especially are often looking outwards. Our 2s are often looking outwards because it's really tough looking at that until it's healed, until it is owned, until it is claimed. And then, of course, our personalities rise to their highest expression. The 4 in the Enneagram, this whole concept of special versus ordinary, again, we can say, a lot of people might want to feel special, perhaps sometimes, or like, hey, I don't want to just be like everybody else. I want to walk my own path. I want to bring something unique to the world. And that's probably a very common desire. But this special versus ordinary of the 4 is not just that, let's say, normal feeling of wanting this. It is rooted in the heart deeply yearning for an image of specialness, and that is still connected to this wound or this feeling of embarrassment or shame. And therefore there can be an exaggeration of specialness or an attachment to specialness as an identity. So that's now how you take the personality pearl and you layer on the polarity to understand why we do what we do. Now we're going to layer on some of the other classical Enneagram triads, and I am going to give them a little bit of a, let's say, a cold spin, because over the years I have also found, let's say, some ways to really simplify the understanding so that it is useful as quickly as possible. But I am going to put a little bit of a warning, not a warning, just a little bit of a cautionary statement before we continue. These little rabbit holes of things like the instincts, the wings, and specifically these other triads, I want you to think of them as subtle overlays or little nuances, or instead of leaving the most important thing, which is the 3 pearls and I believe the 9 polarities. If you stick to the 3 pearls understanding and the 9 polarities as, let's say, 80 or 90% of the understanding you need, you won't get lost. If you start diving into this and you forget that foundation of the pearls and the polarity, you're going to get lost. You're going to get confused by more subtleties. So add this to your understanding, but please don't leave, or it's my suggestion not to leave that foundation. And what I've seen work is that when you do that, you won't get lost, and your ability to understand the type and even facilitate typing will improve dramatically. So let's have a look at this classic triad nuance. Giving credit where it's due, this is the work of Riso and Hudson, who of course are the thought leaders and Enneagram leaders behind the Enneagram Institute, authors, and there's a big legacy behind these great teachers. And the classic labels for this other layer of triad is competency, reactive, and positive, where you start to look for patterns inside of the different personalities and what I like to just call common ground. Now, I have brought some alliteration to the table. And yes, the running joke is that I am addicted to alliteration. But I think the reason I enjoy alliteration is because it helps the mind, not just the blue pearls. And the patterns that we can create with alliteration helps us to understand and remember these key teachings. So I have taken Riso and Hudson's harmonics, what's called the harmonics triad, and I have alliterated it, if there is such a thing, and turned it into 3 keywords. So you've got your practical triad, your purging triad, and your positive triad. So what this means is that, and this helps with mistyping, by the way, this means that our 9s, our 2s, and our 7s share something in common. They have a common expression. They have a common driver. And this is particularly helpful. I'm just going to apply it in one context. It's particularly helpful in relationships. This is work relationships, personal relationships. Our 9, 2, and 7 share the need for some kind of positivity when bonding, connecting, relating. And it's usually the first priority. It's usually what they want first in order to feel connected to someone. Also, when they start a project, they tend to want that to happen first. Some kind of affirming, uplifting, affirmative, positive view of the project. They share that in common, but don't forget that our 9 is going to experience and express this positivity in a red pearl way, with the polarity of peace versus not wanting to be a disruptor. So the 9's positivity is felt in the gut. It's a physically felt sense of calm with uplifting positivity. Our 2 experiences their positivity in the heart. So there's the heart yearns for, needs, feels validated by, feels connected to others through positivity. And our 7 experiences and expresses positivity through the mind, ideas, imagination, projecting the what if this happened, wouldn't that be so amazing, and wants to connect at least first through that. Now if we do the same with the word purge. Now I've picked the word purge. I know it's a little bit of a trickier word instead of reactive, and reactive can work, but let me explain and let's see what you think about this. The 8, in order to feel connected and in order to approach, let's say, a project, first needs to purge. They need some venting time. They need some expression. But what kind of expression? Well, red pearl expression. They want to express their irritation, their resistance, their pushback. And once they've done that, they feel connected. They feel, okay, the space is clear, now we can move on. Our 4 on the Enneagram wants to do exactly the same, but not in a red pill way. They want to share from the heart, the emotionality, the deep intensity, their special or unique way of feeling and expressing feelings and emotions. So they want to share that, even their sadness, before they feel connected. And if they're not given space to do that, they won't feel so connected. So you can see how important this is in relationships. Our 6s need to purge thoughts, fears, concerns, ideas, and they need some space and time to do that before they feel, hey, I can connect with you. There's a thread between us that now I can relax and move on. And it's exactly the same with what I call the practical group. So I could have used the word pragmatic, but I thought practical was probably a little bit simpler. And I do like to do the simple, useful, easy way of understanding all of this. So our type 1 on the Enneagram wants to connect through a sense of pragmatic, practical, like how do we move the dial? How do we join the dots? What do we need to get done here? Get sorted. And of course, our 1 is doing this in a red pill way, which means that their body is really connecting into the sense of right, wrong, irritation, pushback, resistance, etc. And so a 1 wants that to happen first before they get into anything else. Let's just, what do we have to do? What do we have to sort? What do we have to fix? Our beautiful 3 on the Enneagram wants to also just, can we get to the thing that helps move us forward? Can we speed this along? Can we get practical first? Why are we purging? Why are we positive? When we can just move the dial, when we can win through efficiency, and now we're wasting time. Okay. And our 5 also now wants to do this in a mind way, as opposed to the heart of the 3. It's like, this is my image at stake, and the gut of the 1, this is my irritation or my pushback or my resistance. And the 5 is like, yes, my mind wants to join the dots, see what to do, analyze, and get really practical and pragmatic about the situation. So that's my take on the harmonics. And you can probably tell that besides relationships and how people start their projects, this also becomes a helpful way to separate out the types, because what can happen is that people can identify with, let's say, 2 or 3 different types. And yes, use the pearls first, then use the polarities. 80-90% of your focus should be there, I believe. And then you could use this as another layer. So if somebody's relating, for example, to, I think maybe I'm a 7, maybe I'm a 9, you could say, well, perhaps what you're doing is you're relating to the positivity of both. If somebody says, well, I don't know, I seem to either be a 1 or perhaps a 5, it could be the practicality that they are relating to. And perhaps somebody says, look, I don't know if I'm relating to a 4 or a 6, you could say, well, this is the common ground, but then you use the pearl and the polarity to separate them out. The next triad overlay is not that common, and I think it's also interesting and helpful to know about, but I would keep this to 2 to 3% of your understanding. And remember, stick with the pearls and the polarities as the foundation, the most reliable anchor. But this is pretty interesting stuff. And of course, I have a lit and simplified it. Karen Horney created what's called the Hornevian Triad. And again, I think this happens over time, folks. I always say that I don't believe anyone created the Enneagram, just like someone doesn't make an atom and invent an atom. But we are discovering it, and we continue to discover it. The original way of understanding an atom looks very different to today's understanding because scientists make breakthroughs. Each of us that works with the Enneagram, we are the pioneers. We are the ones discovering new insights, dropping old insights, figuring out what works, what doesn't work, because we're unpacking it, we're discovering it. So I really think that what happens is that we see these common grounds, and it is useful to create these frameworks so that we can point out the common grounds. So this is another area of common grounds that is probably worth knowing about. So Karen called these withdrawn, aggressive or assertive, and compliant. And I have turned it into alliteration: comply, challenge, and contemplate. So these are tendencies. A 9, 4, and a 5 share the tendency to move into a contemplative state, especially under duress. there can, or under stress, there can be this pulling back to contemplate. But a 9 contemplates, and I'm adding this, contemplates in a felt body way. A 4 contemplates in a heart, almost like tinges of sadness way. And the 5 contemplates in more of a cerebral ideology, thinking kind of way. But all of them move inwards in this same fashion. Our 8s, 3, and 7 all have a more, I'm going to go get what I need, what I want from the world, this assertional, this more challenging approach. But the 8, of course, is going to do this with that with that strength dynamic, and with this red pearl, driving at this gut felt type of challenging. The 3 is challenging, but challenging with the heart, challenging through this projection of image, challenging through feeling, desire. Desire becomes a form of assertion or aggression for our 3. See, aggression is a little challenge for me, works a little bit, I think a little bit better for now anyway, right? For our 7, the challenging is through the mind. It's like but what about this and what about that? And I'm going to go get what I want using thought and ideas in a blue pearl way. And then the sense of compliance, and I've stuck with the word compliant. It's not compliant like 9, go with the flow, right? This is I'm going to comply in a red pearl way. I'm going to comply. My gut instinct's going to kind of comply, going to just fit in. I'm going to connect to people in a way that is compliant, yes? But because my gut instinct tells me to do so, my heart as a 2 tells me to comply to what the relationship demands. And otherwise my heart's going to feel something is off. And our 6 is complying with the sense of I'm looking for how to belong and comply to the groups that I feel safe in, and therefore there's a sense of compliance there. You can probably tell I'm a little hesitant about this because I keep looking for the little exceptions to the rule here, but I do think it's a helpful Hornevian triad. It's a good overlay to know about, and there is some common ground, but I would personally keep it as a small percentage of understanding. The last grouping I would like to bring to the table, I think, is pretty significant. I have adapted it quite significantly from a table in a framework that Riso and Hudson put forward in their book, The Wisdom of the Enneagram. In the early years of working with this, again experimented with the languaging of it and how clients specifically related. And eventually I settled on what I think is a pretty helpful, simplified understanding, which is to see this as an energy movement framework. And I prefer to focus on a particular quality of the pearl and to show the pattern and the symmetry, the elegance of how each type in that personality pearl has their energy or their attention move differently in a different way. And of course there are exceptions, but there's an overall tendency. So what you find with 8s on the Enneagram is that red pearl, anger, irritation, energy tends to move out like a mist. It's not contained. It's like a presence. So when your 8 walks into the room, there is this felt sense of their attention and that anger energy is moving outwards. Your 9 can move in or out. And we tend to see that when a 9 is in a good space, healthy expression, there's more energy freed outwardly, but they need to almost always balance that with a certain amount of inwards. So there's this in and then there's out. And the anger can also go in or out. Our 1 is containing that anger energy. So there's more of an inwards, trying not to express it outwardly. Makes sense, doesn't it? Our fear energy for our blue pills works in a similar way. So what a 7 does with their fear energy is they push it outwards. They're expressing it outwardly, which is why our 7 has this restlessness, this movement, this busy mind. Like, what's next? Because that fear energy doesn't want to be contained. It wants to be moved in the world. Our 6 on the Enneagram can move both ways. So you get this hot, cold, move still, outward, inwards type of movement of the fear. There's this inward movement of the fear, worry, concern, question, caution, and then there's this outward verbalizing, concern, purging, remember. And so your 6 has got more of this fluid dynamic between the two. Whereas your 5, classically, you see that you don't see the fear because it is inward, it's contained. You don't also see the mind moving. There looks like stillness on the outside of the 5, but inside it's very busy because it's all gone in. Makes sense, yes? Then we look at our shame energy and we feel the same. We see the same kind of dynamic. For our 2 on the Enneagram, the shame is driving a connection outward. So my attention is going to other, to you. My image building is going to you, to other. Our 3 on the Enneagram, that shame energy is moving out to the goal, out to the other people's opinion, and then inwardly contemplating in the heart, sort of really looking at, that feeling is right there. Oh, I don't want to feel it. Now I move back out again. So there's this in-out movement for the 3. And our 4, of course, it is mostly withdrawn inward. So you get this inward movement of the shame where the 4 is experiencing what I call emotional weather patterns, intense feelings of all kinds. Our 4s identify with fear, anger, shame, all of the emotions, but usually in their extreme form because there's all this inward movement of that energy. When you understand the pearl plus the polarity, and then you overlay some of these other triad understandings, and then possibly look at wings and things, but stick to the basics and you won't get lost. I have some videos on the growth paths. I held myself back from talking about the difference between 8 and one of the expressions of 6, which is counterphobic 6. I've got a whole video on that. It's super helpful because this is often neglected. There are no tests for counterphobic 6. So a lot of counterphobic expressions of 6, because there's just really 2 kinds of expressions of 6. It's like the fight or flight expression of 6. They often get typed as 8s because tests don't pick it up. And it could be an aha moment. I can't tell you how many times I've had clients in groups where our beautiful 6s realize, oh my word, I'm actually not an 8. That now makes so much sense. I'm actually a mind type. I'm a blue pearl. I'm not a red pearl. Might have anger, I might have assertion, but it's still rooted in a blue pearl. So check out those videos, and I hope this is really helpful. Really want you to be able to understand the Enneagram so that you can also get on to the really amazing gifts of the Enneagram, which is the map for growth and how we help ourselves and others to rise to our highest expression.